Our story begins with the protagonist's reflection, questioning whether we've ever yearned to be the heroine in a novel, one possessing every desirable quality: beauty, wealth, kindness, and a perfect lover completely enamored with her. Wouldn't most of us choose such a glittering fantasy over reality? Yet, as she reveals in a novel titled Picking Stars, this isn't her wish fulfillment. The novel features a heroine named Eureka, who seemingly has it all. Her story unfolds amidst war and betrayal. After her kingdom, Fland, is conquered by the Crane Wing Empire, Eureka, a princess, is sent away as a hostage. Though fate deals her a cruel hand, she clings to the hope of one day becoming empress. She endures jealousy, harassment, and hostility from the emperor's concubines and nobles. But her unwavering resilience only makes the emperor fall deeper in love with her. Together, they overcome all obstacles, ultimately achieving a happy ending. This is the heroine's tale, but as the narrator reveals with a twist, she isn't Eureka. Instead, she wakes up to find herself as Lydia Audrette, the emperor's 30th concubine, a jealous antagonist who torments Eureka and ultimately meets a tragic end: execution. She is now the villain in the very story she was reading. Lydia finds herself in a dimly lit room, a mixture of shock and confusion swirling within her. Her last clear memory was falling asleep after finishing a novel. She faintly smells smoke. Could it be? Did she die in a fire? The thought feels preposterous, to wake up as a character in a story. Convinced it's all a dream, she decides that if she can fall asleep again, she'll return to her own bed. But the next morning shatters that hope. A woman strides into her room, calling her name and telling her to prepare for the journey to the imperial palace. Still in a daze, Lydia freezes at the mention of the palace. Her mind races, and before she can protest, the woman throws back her covers, scolding her for staying up late. Lydia tries to object, but the woman, unfazed, splashes water on her face, reminding her that they'll miss the carriage. In that wet, bewildered state, Lydia begins to suspect her dream might be her new reality. Fear grips Lydia as she hears talk of the imperial palace and carriages. Today must be the day her character, Lydia, enters the palace, the path that, in the novel, ultimately leads to her tragic end as a concubine. Frustration mounts as she realizes her situation hasn't changed. She's still trapped in this fictional world with no escape in sight. Panicked, she tries to voice her concerns, but her maid misunderstands, assuring her the clothes are of the finest quality and that she can get new ones in the capital. Lydia sighs inwardly, clothes being the least of her worries. Then the woman adds a warning. The noble ladies in the capital are ruthless, and one wrong step could see her expelled from the court before even meeting the emperor. This revelation jolts Lydia, who is urged to make a good impression on His Majesty if she wants to secure her position. Lydia's heart sinks, realizing the Viscountess is oblivious to her protests. Her fate seems sealed. She really is going to the imperial palace. Despite this, she still feels out of place, her inner voice screaming, "I am not Lydia Audrette." As she steps out the door with her companion, she's immediately met with apologies from her maid, claiming Lydia is teary-eyed from clinging to her. Lydia tries to deny it, but her objections are brushed aside as everyone urges her on, worried about being late. Then, her maid reminds her, in a firm tone, of her family's expectations. Lydia must win the emperor's favor, secure the position of empress, for the family's future depends on it. The weight of this pressure crushes her spirit. She's expected to walk this daunting royal path. One wrong step could spell her doom. As the carriage begins to move, panic overwhelms her. "Wait, I can't go to the imperial palace," she whispered to herself in despair, dread washing over her as reality sunk in. The nightmare wasn't over. Lydia contemplated with mounting horror the inexplicable truth. She had somehow become the villainess in a novel. Aside from a name Lydia, she knew next to nothing about her new identity, a fact that left her reeling. How was she supposed to win the emperor's favor? Even if she managed to catch his attention, she knew the ending would only be her beheading. Desperation clawed at her. She considered fleeing the moment the carriage doors opened. If going to the imperial palace meant certain death, perhaps escaping now was her only option. But then she recalled a detail from the story. The emperor, having ended the war by signing a peace treaty, took the daughters of various lords as concubines to secure the peace. Anyone who defied him risked execution for disrupting the alliance. Realizing this, Lydia felt trapped. Escaping might lead to execution for violating the treaty, but facing the emperor seemed to promise the same fate. With no clear path forward, as the imperial palace loomed before her, Lydia could only ponder if there was any possibility of survival. The steward formally announced Lydia's status. Miss Lydia Audrette, I pronounce you the 30th concubine of our esteemed emperor. The number startled her. 30th. The emperor certainly wasn't short on concubines. The steward then directed her to the Lily Palace, located on the west side of the imperial palace. She realized that the emperor of Heroine, the monarch hailed as the god of war, indeed had 30 concubines, each ranked according to their family status. As the daughter of a viscount, Lydia found herself at the very bottom of the hierarchy. Lydia considered her strategy. With no chance of meeting the emperor and no apparent benefits to her new status, she decided to keep a low profile. Her plan was simple: stay quiet, avoid attention, live a peaceful life, and do anything to avoid a tragic end. In this story, her sole objective now was to survive, no matter how long it took. 3 years passed, during which Lydia remained completely isolated, interacting with no one but the servants. Her life became quiet, solitary. She found it perfect until today. This peaceful routine was broken by a young man who caught her attention. Lydia noted that she had never seen him before and wondered who he was. She initially assumed he might be a new servant, as she had requested a new vase from the head steward, and she figured he must be delivering it. However, as she observed him more closely, she couldn't help but think he was rather handsome. All the servants who had visited so far had been older men. Curiosity piqued. She reached out to receive the vase, but then noticed something odd. His hands were empty. Confusion bloomed. She began to doubt he was a servant at all. Just as Lydia was about to inquire, the young man suddenly smiled, a smile that made him appear even more handsome, and a strange feeling stirred within her. She couldn't help but feel that the situation was somewhat suspicious. Lydia began to question the young man about his identity, but he simply replied that he was a servant, then inquired about hers in return. This puzzled Lydia. How strange, she thought, that a servant in the palace wouldn't recognize her, especially since she was Lydia Audrette, a concubine of the Lily Palace. Assuming he must be new, she explained her status to him, mentioning that only specific individuals were permitted within this palace. She wondered how he had arrived here without knowing her. However, the young man seemed unconcerned, instead turning his attention to the nearby flowers. He asked if she had grown them, and when she confirmed, he immediately inquired about how she cultivated them. Lydia was taken aback, unsure why he was suddenly so interested in her flowers. More importantly, she wondered if he had even heard her mention her status. Lydia, a concubine within the palace walls, noticed the young man's evident confusion and decided to clarify her position once more. She emphasized her status as the emperor's 30th concubine, urging him to show the proper respect, as any disrespect towards her was tantamount to disrespecting the emperor himself. The young man simply responded with a thoughtful hum. Satisfied, Lydia inquired if he understood. Deciding to overlook his initial impudence, she presented a request in return. She explained her need for a new vase to hold her flowers, having accidentally broken her previous one, leaving her with nowhere to display them. While she could order one using palace resources, it would take a month to arrive. She hinted that she would be immensely grateful if he could procure one sooner. The young man agreed without hesitation. Lydia felt a surge of triumph, believing she had successfully persuaded him to fetch her a new vase. She pictured arranging the blossoms in the vase, adding a touch of beauty to her palace quarters. However, her reverie was interrupted by the arrival of the steward, who informed her that she was invited to the grand ball that evening. To her surprise, he mentioned that she would be meeting the emperor and needed to prepare immediately to avoid being late. As her maids gathered to assist her, Lydia's mind raced. She had kept a low profile for the past 3 years, avoiding attention. Why was she suddenly being thrust into the spotlight? A wave of apprehension washed over Lydia as she recalled the upcoming ball. She remembered this event being pivotal in the novel. It was where the heroine, Eureka, first encountered the emperor. At this ball, Eureka, the princess of the fallen kingdom of Fland, was introduced as the 31st concubine and immediately captured the emperor's attention. After some thought, Lydia realized the emperor likely invited all the concubines to welcome the arrival of, presumably, Eureka, as she was the first new concubine in 3 years. But a chilling memory surfaced. In the story, Lydia Audrette was, on this very night, destined to die at the emperor's hand. Panic began to rise within Lydia. Inhabiting Lydia's body seemed to have blurred her memory of the novel's plot, leaving her future uncertain. Frustration and fear warred within her. Although it had only been 3 years since she became trapped in this novel, the details of the story were already starting to fade. The specifics of Lydia's life, a minor antagonist in the plot, were a blur, and it was driving her to the brink. Was she truly fated to die tonight? She struggled to recall what she could. Eureka quickly won the emperor's heart, transforming from hostage to empress almost overnight. But she couldn't remember the crucial detail, what Lydia had done to provoke Eureka and incur the emperor's wrath. Had Lydia caused a scene, pulling Eureka's hair? Or was it a mere accident, a clumsy bump? With the emperor's reputation for belligerence, he could have overreacted to a trifle. After all, Lydia was merely his 30th concubine, with no power or influence. What real harm could she have caused? The unfairness of her situation weighed heavily upon her. The maids excitedly chattered about how fortunate Lydia was, mentioning that only 2 concubines were invited to the banquet that night, and she might even meet His Majesty himself. Another maid chimed in, saying that despite working in the palace for years, they had never actually seen the emperor. He was always on a battlefield and, even within the palace, was rumored to wear a mask to protect himself from assassination attempts. Few knew his true face, save for his closest attendants. It was indeed a rare honor. Suddenly, a crucial piece clicked into place for Lydia. No one knew what the emperor looked like. That must be why Lydia, unknowingly, offended Eureka in front of him. The thought of potentially accidentally enraging Eureka and being summarily executed sent a fresh wave of panic through her. Lydia wondered if feigning illness might be her escape from the dreaded event. With a weak smile, she mentioned a slight headache. Her worried handmaid, assuming the heavy ruby ornaments in Lydia's hair were the culprit, immediately offered to replace them with lighter blossoms. A second maid cheerfully praised Lydia's new look, declaring she appeared ethereal, the flowers far more suited to her than jewels. A third maid, giggling, admitted they should have thought of it sooner and apologized for their tardiness in attending to her. She promised to be more attentive from now on. Inwardly, Lydia wished they would simply forget her altogether. She craved no attention within the palace walls, silently praying for their continued neglect. She knew the palace maids were expected to attend to all the concubines, many of whom even offered them gifts to curry favor and ensure a good word reached the emperor. However, living in the secluded corner of the palace had kept Lydia blissfully unnoticed for the past 3 years. She only saw servants when they delivered supplies, and no maid had ever dressed her hair or cleaned her palace since her arrival. This meant she'd had to perform all tasks herself, from cleaning and cooking to tending the small garden. While arduous, it had helped her maintain a low profile. The emperor's invitation, however, had abruptly changed everything. It felt almost ludicrous, their sudden attentiveness after 3 years of utter disregard. The maids finished their preparations, stepping back to declare her ready. The second maid gasped, exclaiming how radiant Lady Lydia looked, their efforts clearly not in vain. Another chimed in, mentioning rumors of His Majesty's cold demeanor, but expressing hope that Lydia's beauty would be enough to capture his heart. Inwardly, Lydia grimaced, thinking she'd much prefer they wish her good luck instead. Unfortunately, her attempt to feign illness had failed, and now she had to face the ballroom. She knew the invitation had come directly from the emperor, and failing to attend could have dire consequences. He might even order her execution for such a blatant disregard. As Lydia's carriage arrived, the driver announced their arrival. Steeling herself, she stepped out, vowing to be as inconspicuous as possible. Her plan was simple: avoid all men, steer clear of Eureka, stay in a corner until the ball concluded, and then make a swift exit. She tried to reassure herself that she could manage it, but a rising tide of anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. Attempting to compose herself, she asked if she could have a moment to breathe in some fresh air. A slightly surprised servant agreed, directing her towards a terrace. They reminded her to return before the horns sounded. Lydia realized the Emperor and Eureka hadn't yet arrived at the ball, so she decided to take a few deep breaths before venturing inside. Just then, she accidentally bumped into a girl with pale pink hair. The girl asked if Lydia was all right, and Lydia began to apologize, but stopped abruptly. She noticed the girl's cotton candy pink hair and lake blue eyes. Lydia quickly realized this must be Eureka, as she perfectly matched the descriptions from the novel. While admiring Eureka's beauty, Lydia noticed the flowers Eureka held looked identical to the ones growing in her own garden. Though slightly different in color, they appear to be the same rare, unnamed flower in this world. However, Lydia quickly dismissed the thought, realizing she couldn't risk angering Eureka. She apologized, stating she hadn't recognized Her Highness. Eureka, surprised, inquired about Lydia's identity and how she knew who she was. Lydia introduced herself as Lydia Audrette, the Emperor's 30th concubine, explaining she had heard of Eureka after receiving the invitation. Eureka noted a slight shift in the atmosphere, but dismissed it, while Lydia, nervously offering her greetings, felt a wave of relief wash over her as Eureka appeared, for now, to be non-hostile. Ursina introduced herself as Princess Ursina Furland, soon to be the Emperor's 31st concubine. For a fleeting moment, Lydia thought she saw a cold look in Ursina's eyes, but she reassured herself it must have been a misunderstanding, as Ursina was portrayed as a kind and noble heroine in the novel. She enthusiastically expressed her anticipation of seeing Ursina often. Ursina suggested that Lydia needn't be so formal, as they were now both concubines of equal standing. Lydia offered a polite smile. Inwardly, however, she resolved not to offend Ursina, feeling she had no choice but to keep the heroine content. Ursina then gestured for Lydia to rise. As Ursina intended to enter, it caused Lydia some fluster. They bumped into each other. Lydia immediately apologized for her clumsiness. Ursina reassured her that it was just an accidental collision. Lydia felt a wave of relief, thinking that Ursina, being the kind heroine, wasn't angered by the bump. Ursina then told Lydia she was going inside, bidding her farewell, to which Lydia quickly responded. After Ursina left, Lydia took a deep breath, relieved that the encounter had gone smoothly. She wondered if this meeting was similar to how it was described in the novel, but regardless, she was glad nothing had gone awry. Now that Ursina was inside, Lydia anticipated the Emperor's imminent arrival. Though hesitant to step into the daunting environment, she knew she had to enter before the Emperor. Steeling her resolve, she understood there was no turning back now. As Lydia walked forward, she heard an unfamiliar sound and noticed a flower on the ground. Recognizing it as one from Ursina's hair, she surmised it must have fallen off during their collision. Nearby, she also spotted a small glass vial and picked it up for closer inspection. She speculated that it might be medicine, then caught the subtle fragrance she had previously noticed on Ursina. Concluding it must be perfume, she decided to keep it safe, intending to return it to Ursina later. Lydia noticed a crack in the vial. Realizing this was the source of the escaping scent, she decided to wrap it in her handkerchief. Inhaling the fragrance, she guessed it must be an expensive perfume, befitting someone like Ursina. As the floral scent grew stronger, Lydia worried it might cling to her, hoping Ursina wouldn't think she had used it without permission. She told herself she hadn't broken the vial on purpose. Still hesitant, Lydia walked onto the terrace, feeling overwhelmed by the prospect of attending the ball. She reasoned that no one would notice her presence anyway. She questioned why she had been invited at all, speculating that the Emperor might have sent out invitations to the concubines randomly, and she was simply unlucky enough to be chosen. Lost in thought, Lydia accidentally bumped into a young man who was approaching. After apologizing, she realized it was the same servant she had encountered before. He remarked on seeing her again, asking why she was outside. Surprised to see him there, Lydia questioned why a servant like him would be present at the ball. Recalling his failure to deliver the vase she had requested, she grew suspicious. The young man replied that he was working, which caused Lydia some embarrassment, realizing her question was redundant, as he was clearly there to serve the guests. She then brought up the matter of the vase, reminding him of her request during his previous visit to her palace. When he appeared confused, Lydia grew frustrated, assuming he had forgotten her request because of her low status. The young man suddenly seemed to remember. Lydia doubted he had genuinely just recalled her request and, disappointed, decided she should enter the ballroom. However, as she attempted to go inside, she was surprised to find him blocking the doorway. Annoyed, she questioned him, but he stopped her, producing a vase and taking out the flowers already inside. He offered them to her, explaining that she could use this one if she needed a vase for her flowers. Lydia felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She hadn't wanted a vase right now. She pointed out that the vase he offered was palace property and worried he might get in trouble for taking it. The young man calmly dismissed her concerns, assuring her that no one would notice a single vase missing from a corner of the hall. His nonchalance almost convinced her, but she still hesitated to take something that belonged to the palace. Realizing she had lingered too long, she quickly thanked him and told him to get back to work. Just as she turned to leave, however, the young man suddenly grabbed her hand, startling her. "What are you doing?" she asked, surprised. Her thoughts scrambled as she noticed him leaning closer. She couldn't understand why he was acting this way. Uncomfortable, she called out to him, demanding to know why he was still approaching. Confused and flustered, she was unsure of his intentions as he continued to draw near. Lydia pushed the young man away, clearly uncomfortable with his proximity. "What's wrong?" he asked, which only irritated her further. "You're too close," she retorted. His behavior was completely inappropriate, she thought, especially since he knew she was one of the Emperor's concubines. Staying near him would only lead to trouble, she decided, and it was best to leave. He caught her off guard, however, by commenting that she smelled nice. Confused, she asked him what he meant, and he explained that he wanted to know where the scent was coming from. Realizing he was talking about her perfume, Lydia grew even more uneasy. The intensity of his curious gaze made her feel like he wouldn't let her go until she gave him an answer. "I'm not sure," she stammered. "The maids prepared me. Ask them if you're so curious." As she tried to leave, the young man watched her go, thinking to himself that she was trying to escape. A smug smile played on his lips as he considered his next move. Lydia heard the sound of trumpets, realizing it signaled the Emperor's arrival. Knowing the Emperor's procession usually took some time, she was confident she could slip into the ballroom unnoticed before the music ended. Still, she worried that a concubine's absence might cause a stir and hoped to arrive before the Emperor. Lydia hurried into the ballroom, relieved to have made it. Looking around, she noted the Emperor hadn't entered yet and searched for Eureka. Spotting Ursina, Lydia found her standing beside another concubine who had also been invited to the ball. As the attendants announced the Emperor's arrival, everyone bowed respectfully, expressing their honor to be in his presence. Lydia watched the scene unfold. This was him, she realized, the protagonist of the novel, the Emperor, the male lead. She couldn't wait to see him. She imagined he must be sculpted to perfection, especially considering how beautiful Eureka, the female lead, was. However, she was surprised to see the Emperor wearing a veil. She wondered if this detail had been mentioned in the novel, as she couldn't recall any descriptions of his hair or eye color. She remembered an important custom of the Emperor. Only high-ranking nobles and concubines personally chosen by him were allowed to greet him directly. She recalled that in the novel, only Ursina, among the concubines present, had been granted the honor of greeting the Emperor. A voice called out, requesting Lady Ursina Furland to step forward. Lydia watched intently, knowing this was the pivotal moment she had been waiting for. This was the moment when the cold and ruthless Emperor was supposed to fall head over heels for Ursina. Lydia, barely containing her excitement, watched with bated breath, curious to see how the Emperor's icy demeanor would melt in Ursina's presence. With graceful deference, Ursina greeted the Emperor, expressing her honor at her first audience with him. She introduced herself as Ursina of the Furland Kingdom, pledging her loyalty as his 31st concubine and vowing to uphold the honor of her homeland. Lydia was ecstatic. Everything was unfolding perfectly, just as she'd anticipated. Among the assembled noble women, whispers rippled through the ballroom, speculating on the Emperor's intentions. One lady remarked that the banquet seemed to be held in honor of the new concubine, Ursina, and to celebrate his recent victory, hinting at the Emperor's potential interest in her. Another lady, overhearing this, leaned in with keen interest. Hearing this, Lydia thought to herself, of course he's interested in Ursina. She's the heroine of the story, after all. Lydia eagerly awaited the next tradition, a ritual exclusive to the emperor's concubines, a symbolic gesture of loyalty and trust. She recalled the custom. The concubine was to kiss the emperor's right shoulder, a testament to her devotion. Lydia watched intently, anticipating this moment as the catalyst for a powerful connection between Ursina and the emperor. Ursina gracefully expressed her gratitude, acknowledging the profound honor. Lydia was stunned. Nothing happened. No spark ignited between Ursina and the emperor, no immediate declaration of affection. Had she gotten the timeline wrong? She began to doubt herself. Perhaps this pivotal moment was meant for tomorrow, not today, she wondered. Just then, the steward announced that one more person was required to greet the emperor. He called the name of Lady Lydia Audrette. Lydia was shocked, utterly bewildered. She had assumed she was merely there to fill the room, not to be presented to the emperor personally. Despite her surprise, she resolved to obey. Refusal could be construed as disrespect towards the emperor, an offense punishable by who knew what. He was probably just curious about the well-being of his lowest-ranking concubine, she reasoned, trying to calm her nerves. The steward gestured for Lydia to approach the emperor. Though her heart pounded in her chest, she introduced herself as the 30th concubine. Inwardly, she felt an immense pressure, convinced that merely standing there was shaving years off her life. She just wanted to get this over with and retreat. As Lydia looked up, she accidentally lifted a corner of the Duke's mask, catching a glimpse of his face. Panic seized her. She had made a grave mistake. She was sure of it. This was it. She was in serious trouble. The steward, noticing her distress, reassured her that it was all right and that she could withdraw. He added that lingering too long might be perceived as rude. Lydia breathed a sigh of relief. She quickly agreed and prepared to leave. As Lydia retreated, the noble women murmured amongst themselves. They expressed a flicker of curiosity, then dismissed her as merely the 30th concubine of little consequence. One lady admitted that for a moment she thought the emperor had shown interest in Lydia, but quickly laughed, embarrassed by the notion. They remarked on Lydia's awkwardness. Her lack of formal training and low birth must be the reason for her low rank among the concubines, they speculated. As Lydia made her escape, she exhaled, relieved. She had survived her encounter with the emperor. Exhausted, she just wanted to return to the sanctuary of her own palace and rest. Meanwhile, a noblewoman watched Lydia with disdain, indignant at the very presence of the lowly 30th concubine. Lydia wasn't surprised. She'd known Ursina would be the belle of the ball, the center of attention, and that she herself would be largely ignored. She was certain the emperor wouldn't summon her either. Even though she'd come to the ball, no one had approached her, Lydia thought. Even the maids seemed to be avoiding her. A pang of jealousy, a yearning for connection, struck her. Yet, for survival, she had chosen this quiet, isolated existence. 3 years of solitude had indeed been lonely. Realizing she was wallowing, Lydia decided to get some fresh air, hoping to avoid any potential trouble with the emperor or Ursina. She recalled there might be a side door nearby, used by the servants. She could slip out unnoticed from there. Lydia located a door, wondering if it led outside. Just as relief washed over her at the prospect of escape, a flickering candle nearby sent a jolt of fear through her. Ever since waking up in Lydia's body, she'd harbored an intense fear of fire, perhaps a lingering trauma from burning to death in her previous life. Just then, a girl called out to her, asking why she was in such a hurry to leave, catching Lydia off guard as she was about to slip away quietly. Lydia recognized Lady Caroline, the 3rd concubine, and wondered what she was doing there, suspecting she might have been followed. Nervously, Lydia offered a greeting, but Caroline immediately confronted her, expressing disbelief. That someone as low-ranking as the 30th concubine, Lydia, had received an invitation to the ball. Caroline accused Lydia of manipulating high-ranking officials, like the Prime Minister or the Minister of Defense, to secure the invitation. Lydia, feeling a mixture of fear and discomfort, politely asked Caroline to let her go, clearly distressed by the confrontation. Caroline, enraged, grabbed Lydia's hair, yanking it hard while berating her. She accused Lydia of having the audacity to even show her face at the ball, implying Lydia should have stayed in her quarters as usual instead of trying to catch the Emperor's attention. Caroline insinuated that Lydia felt threatened by the arrival of the 31st concubine, Ursina. Lydia, feeling scared and helpless, tried to explain that she hadn't done anything wrong, but Caroline cut her off. She complained that dealing with the first and second concubines was troublesome enough, and she had no patience left for insignificant ones like Lydia. Caroline scolded Lydia, insisting she should have stayed hidden in the recesses of the palace, claiming that everything happening now was Lydia's own fault. Lydia attempted to defend herself, insisting she hadn't done anything wrong and that Caroline must have misunderstood her intentions. However, the furious Caroline dismissed her explanation, saying every concubine she'd confronted used the same excuse, asking Lydia if she thought she was foolish enough to believe it. She then ordered Lydia to leave the ball immediately, warning her that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated. Caroline then turned to her servant, Ted, instructing him to prepare for further action. She gave Lydia a chilling choice, implying she could be crippled by having an arm or leg broken, or even silenced permanently. Lydia, bewildered and terrified, questioned Caroline's intentions, trying to grasp the gravity of the threat. Caroline coldly explained that crippling Lydia would ensure she remained hidden, as no one would be interested in a disabled concubine. As Caroline's servant, Ted, approached menacingly, Lydia's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she was trapped and outmatched, but she couldn't give up now, not after everything she'd endured to survive. Lydia tried to appeal to Caroline's reason, reminding her that harming another concubine within the Sun Palace, where the Emperor resided, could have dire consequences. But Caroline simply sneered, dismissing Lydia's warning and giving Ted the signal to proceed. Panic seized Lydia, her thoughts racing. She recalled her narrow escape from the Emperor's displeasure earlier, realizing that if she froze now, paralyzed by fear, she might not survive this encounter. Though her body trembled, she refused to succumb to helplessness. Memories of her past life flashed through her mind, the trauma of the fire resurfacing. Despite her terror, Lydia steeled herself, determined not to end as a forgotten footnote, a minor villain in history's grand narrative. "I will live," she whispered fiercely to herself, bracing for whatever came next. The injustice of it all pressed down on her, the thought that she had never tried to entice the Emperor, yet was facing such dire consequences. She thought that if she was going to die like this, she might as well have at least tried to change her fate. Just as she began to weep in despair, a choked no escaping her lips, the unexpected happened. Ted, who was about to carry out Lady Caroline's command, suddenly collapsed. Lydia stared in shock as Caroline, too, crumpled to the floor. Utter confusion washed over Lydia. She had no idea what had just transpired. Both Ted and Caroline were down in an instant. She barely had time to process the situation before a young man appeared before her. Looking at the young man, Lydia recognized him as the servant she had encountered earlier. Grateful, she thanked him for saving her. The young man warned her to be careful, as the Emperor's concubines could be quite ruthless. Lydia acknowledged this, but her mind quickly filled with worry. She wondered what she would do if something like this happened again, realizing her vulnerability without a guard. Considering her options, she thought about asking the young man for help. But before she could speak, he suggested that if she wanted to repay him for saving her life, she should allow him to visit her chambers later. Lydia was taken aback, the idea of this young man wanting to visit her chambers striking her as odd. But before she could inquire further, he warned that others were approaching, alerted by the commotion, and advised her to leave quickly. She stared at him incredulously as he walked towards the balcony, unsure why he was heading in that direction, and hesitantly agreed to leave. To her astonishment, he scaled the balcony and jumped, leaving Lydia gaping, wondering if he was even human. Reeling from the chaotic series of events, she sighed, thinking that life as a character in a novel was supposed to be easier than this. Realizing she needed to leave as well, she attempted to walk, but a sudden pain shot through her ankle. She remembered twisting it earlier when she bumped into Ursina. Alerted by the noise, the steward arrived, demanding to know what had happened. Lydia panicked, thinking that no sooner had the servant left than she was embroiled in another predicament. Seeing her, the steward immediately noticed the unconscious Lady Caroline and the man on the floor, and suspiciously asked Lydia if she had anything to do with Lady Caroline's injury. Lydia tried to deny it, but the steward remained skeptical. He insisted she explain herself, pointing out that as the only one standing, she was the natural suspect. Frustrated, Lydia insisted to the steward that she hadn't done anything wrong. However, the steward questioned her presence there, as the corridor was typically used only by servants, and as a concubine of the emperor, she had no business in that area. Lydia struggled to come up with an explanation, wondering if the head steward would believe her story. Just then, the voice of a young man from earlier echoed down the hallway. He stepped forward, proclaiming Lydia's innocence. Introducing himself as a servant of the Sun Palace, he explained that he had been on his way to tend the gardens and had seen Lydia passing by. According to him, she seemed to be heading to the gardens as well. He then recounted how Lady Caroline had suddenly appeared and aggressively confronted Lydia. The young man continued to explain that Lydia wasn't the instigator, claiming that Lady Caroline and her servant had attacked her. He admitted that he couldn't bear to watch, so he closed his eyes and covered his ears. To his surprise, he heard Lady Caroline scream, not Lydia. When he opened his eyes, he saw Lydia standing there while Lady Caroline and her servant lay unconscious on the ground. Taking this into account, the steward considered that Lydia had only acted in self-defense. He asked the young man if he could truthfully vouch for his statement, and the young man affirmed that he could. A guard then spoke up, supporting the young man's account, as they had confirmed the unconscious man on the ground was indeed Lady Caroline Raleigh's servant. Stunned by this new information, the steward immediately ordered the guards to restrain the unconscious servant and secure Lady Caroline as well. Once the guards carried out the order, the steward instructed them to escort Lydia to another room. For her safety, the situation was quickly brought under control. When Lady Caroline and her servant regained consciousness, they were thoroughly questioned and, under pressure, confessed to their plan to harm Lydia. Meanwhile, Lydia rested in a quiet room within the Sun Palace, accompanied by the servant who had bravely testified on her behalf. A maid approached Lydia, informing her that the carriage to return her to the Lily Palace was ready. Lydia acknowledged this, saying she would be there shortly. Then, noticing the young man who had testified for her, she approached him and asked if he was the one who had spoken up. He nervously confirmed that he was. Lydia expressed her relief that the misunderstanding had been cleared up, sincerely thanking him for his bravery, while acknowledging that he must have been frightened. The young man humbly apologized for not stepping forward sooner, but wished her a safe return to the Lily Palace. Lydia chuckled softly, saying she should be going, bidding him farewell and telling him to take care. The young man returned the sentiment, wishing her a safe journey. The steward apologized to Lydia for the day's events, admitting that it must have been distressing for her. He assured her that His Majesty would severely punish those responsible, so she needn't worry. Lydia responded briefly and then headed towards the carriage. As Lydia finally returned to her palace and rested, she reflected on the exhausting ordeal. She hoped that no strange rumors would arise from the incident, as she didn't want to attract any more attention. Meanwhile, news of the incident at the Sun Palace ball began to spread. Rumors circulated that the third concubine, out of jealousy, had attempted to harm the 30th concubine. Whispers that had begun circulating in the palace since early morning claimed that the 30th concubine had single-handedly defeated the third concubine's burly servant. As a result, it was said that the third concubine had been expelled from the palace for causing such a scene. Lydia was shocked and dismayed when she heard this. She wondered who had spread such a story, thinking that it certainly wasn't her who had actually knocked out her two attackers. She knew that it was the mysterious young man who had caused them to collapse, not her. Lydia first expressed her gratitude to Mar for his help the previous day, admitting that thanks to him, she had escaped the situation unharmed. Then, she formally introduced herself as Lydia Odette, the 30th concubine residing in the Lily Palace, and asked for his name. The young man calmly replied that his name was March. Lydia thanked him again, confirming if it was all right to call him by his name. Mar indifferently replied that she could call him whatever she liked. Curious, Lydia asked Mar where he worked, but his answer surprised her, as he said he didn't work anywhere. He ran away. Lydia initially acknowledged his response, then, suddenly realizing the implications, stammered in shock. "Why did you run away?" Mar explained that he had been captured in war and was meant to become a servant to the emperor. But he had escaped because he didn't want to live that kind of life. Lydia, astonished, asked if he was serious. Mar continued, pleading to stay in her palace, saying he'd pretended to flee outside the capital, so he thought it should be safe. He promised to stay hidden, explaining his plan to hide until the emperor left for another war, giving him a chance to escape permanently. Lydia considered the idea. It might be feasible, she thought, since her palace rarely received visitors outside of the monthly supply deliveries. But the risk made her uneasy. If Mar were discovered, he would be executed for treason, and she might be punished as well. She anxiously pondered what to do. Sensing her hesitation, Mar offered a compromise. If she let him hide there, he would act as her bodyguard. Lydia echoed in surprise, "My bodyguard." She had been meaning to hire one, knowing that no matter how hard she tried to keep a low profile, others might still target her. But she still hesitated, feeling the situation was incredibly risky. Noticing her hesitation, Mar simply said, "Please agree." Lydia wavered, unsure if she could fully trust Mar, as they were essentially strangers. She explained that if he became her bodyguard, he would have to obey her commands, which seemed unusual, as he appeared to be from a noble family, while she was merely a low-ranking concubine. Inwardly, she found herself flustered by his handsome features. Mar replied nonchalantly that he didn't mind obeying her commands, which surprised Lydia, making her wonder if, despite the risks, she could trust him. Mar promised obedience, asking if he could stay by Lydia's side. Lydia considered the situation, thinking it might be all right, as she did need a bodyguard, and he had saved her life. Then she asked if he was truly willing to obey her commands. When he confirmed, she decided to show him around her palace, offering him any of the empty rooms, and led him forward. Mar's attention was caught by the surrounding flowers. That night, in the emperor's office at the Sun Palace, Jaime Genovia, the emperor's double and sole servant, bowed in greeting to his majesty. Jaime apologized to the emperor for forgetting to remove his veil, having been preoccupied with recent events. The prince then requested a report from Jaime. In response, Jaime revealed that his homeland, Genovia, had been destroyed by the Heron Empire. He explained that he had been the Prince of Genovia and, unlike the other royals, had fought until the very end. The Emperor of the Heron Empire, impressed by Jaime's courage, took him as a prisoner of war. The Heron Prince made Prince Jaime of Genovia an offer he couldn't refuse. He asked Jaime to act as his double until the Heron Empire conquered the entire continent, promising that if Jaime fulfilled this task, he would make a special exception and return Jaime's kingdom. 8 years had passed since Jaime accepted the Emperor's offer and began living as his double. Despite criticism for seemingly surrendering to the kingdom's enemy, Jaime remained firm in his decision. He reflected that although the Heron Marquis Emperor was a ruthless warmonger and killer, known as the God of War, for the future of his nation, Jaime was willing to humble himself and endure this role. Jaime noticed a hint of Astra on Princess Urusina, a dangerous scent that could cause harm if he hadn't prepared an antidote beforehand. The prince pondered the nature of Astra, recognizing that while the flower itself appeared harmless, the fragrance extracted from it was incredibly potent and toxic. He recalled that a highly concentrated extract of Astra could rob a person of their reason, rendering them subservient to their attacker. This unique flower grew only in Fland, and only the Flandians knew how to cultivate it. In the war between Heron and Fland, countless Heron soldiers had perished due to this deadly fragrance. Jaime mentioned that the Astra scent on Princess Urusina wasn't potent enough to constitute treason, though he had initially suspected she might be wearing a high concentration of Astra perfume, intending to harm the prince. Despite this, he reminded the prince to remain vigilant and keep a close eye on her, as eliminating the princess would be a blow to the Flandian rebels' morale. The prince replied that if the princess were to use a high concentration of Astra extract, Jaime should arrest her for treason and dispose of her immediately. Jaime acknowledged his understanding, but he posed another question, inquiring why the prince had invited the 30th concubine, Lydia Odette, to the ball. The prince countered by asking Jaime why he was curious about Lydia Odette's presence. Jaime cautiously explained that he had also detected a faint Astra fragrance on her, suspecting she might be experimenting with a dangerous potion within the palace. Jamie proposed assigning someone to monitor her activities, but the prince dismissed his concerns, stating that it was impossible for Lydia to know about Astra. Jamie insisted he was certain, but the prince abruptly cut him off, ending the topic. Jamie quickly apologized and accepted the prince's command. The prince pondered Jamie's suspicion, realizing that the connection between Lydia and the Astra flower was indeed peculiar, even though she hadn't concealed the flowers. Her smooth hands and the faint fragrance suggested she was neither an assassin nor aware of the flower's toxicity. This realization brought the prince a sense of relief, as it meant she genuinely didn't know the dangers of Astra. For him, this was a fortunate discovery. His kingdom had tried and failed multiple times to cultivate Astra, but now, with someone within the palace unknowingly growing them, he saw an opportunity. By wisely utilizing her skills, he believed he could finally achieve his ambitions. The prince dismissed Jamie's inquiry, instructing him to focus on his own duties and not meddle in matters that didn't concern him. Jamie affirmed his commitment, assuring the prince he would diligently carry out his responsibilities. Before leaving, the prince informed Jamie that he would be leaving the palace for a while, expecting him to continue executing the plan in his absence. Jamie agreed with slight hesitation, wishing the prince a safe journey. Meanwhile, the next morning, Lydia, upon seeing Mar, walked towards him excitedly. She said she had prepared a picnic breakfast and invited him to join her. When she asked Mar if he was hungry, he replied that he wasn't particularly so, though he seemed somewhat curious about her invitation. Lydia was surprised and, interpreting it in her own way, assumed Mar must be very hungry. Mar, noticing the blanket she was sitting on, asked her what it was. He said it looked like the kind of blanket armies used on the battlefield, even asking if war had broken out again. This puzzled Lydia, as she thought it was clearly a picnic blanket with its colorful patterns, arranged food, and a picnic basket beside it. She couldn't understand why he would associate it with war. It occurred to her that Mar might be so haunted by past experiences that even ordinary objects reminded him of the battlefield. Lydia realized Mar's behavior might stem from his past, and she felt a pang of sympathy for him. When Mar asked her what she was thinking, she quickly brushed it off, explaining that they were simply having a picnic breakfast on the grass, not eating rations on a battlefield, preparing for another fight. Mar seemed to understand and accepted the sandwich she offered him. As Mar took a bite, Lydia eagerly asked him what he thought of the taste. Mar admitted it was good and inquired who had made it. Lydia proudly declared that she had prepared it herself, adding that she actually had a knack for making sandwiches. Mar asked Lydia why she didn't have any maids attending her and why she was preparing her own food. Lydia explained that she found having maids around rather uncomfortable, so she had dismissed them all. Inwardly, she acknowledged that while it was normal for lower-ranking concubines to have fewer attendants, she was the only one in the palace without even a single maid for cleaning or cooking. Despite this, Lydia assured him that she had grown accustomed to handling everything herself, finding it more comfortable this way. Changing the subject, she asked Mar if he had ever cooked or even made a simple sandwich. Mar honestly admitted that he had never done so. Noticing Mar's lack of experience, Lydia cheerfully offered to teach him how to cook. She pointed out that since they would be living together, it was only fair that he help with meal preparation. Mar hesitantly expressed his lack of experience, but Lydia encouraged him, saying everyone starts somewhere. She admitted her own culinary skills were limited to simple dishes, like sandwiches, and then tentatively asked if he had ever roasted meat on the battlefield, drawing a comparison to cooking at home. She thoughtfully added that if he had an aversion to blood or knives, she could understand why he might find cooking difficult. Lydia mused that those returning from the battlefield often developed trauma related to violence, but Mar confidently assured her that if there was one thing he was good at, it was knife work. Relieved, Lydia confessed that she struggled with handling meat or fish and often required assistance from the kitchen staff. She proposed a trade. She would teach him to cook, and he could teach her how to properly handle meat. She handed him some spices, encouraging him to learn. She explained that these cooking skills would be useful when he eventually left the Lily Palace, and now was a good opportunity to learn. Lydia suggested they finish their breakfast first, mentioning that while there was only one sandwich each, she had brought plenty of fresh blueberries. After they finished eating, she excitedly suggested they go to the garden. He recalled the beautiful white flowers from a few days prior and was eager to see them again. However, upon reaching the garden, Mar bluntly stated that the flowers were all dead. Lydia, startled by his abrupt statement, expressed her surprise. She couldn't understand what had happened, as the flowers had been perfectly fine just the day before yesterday. Startled by Mar's sudden reaction, Lydia chided him for frightening her. Curious, she asked why he was so shocked by the flowers, and Mar questioned her in return, implying she had put a lot of effort into cultivating them. Lydia reassured him that this withering was part of the flower's growth cycle. She urged him to look closely, pointing out that the flowers naturally wilted within a few days of blooming. Usually, they would bloom again for 3 more days, but last night's rain might have caused them to wilt faster. Lydia added that the flowers were sensitive and easily affected by changes in the weather. Noticing the flowers looked completely withered, Lydia was surprised to find they weren't actually dead. She then observed Mar seemed quite interested in the Astra flowers, assuming he also liked flowers. However, Mar felt a bit embarrassed as he felt she was looking at him like a child. Lydia explained that these unique flowers had a special characteristic. They had 2 lives and would soon be reborn. When Mar expressed curiosity, she admitted it was hard to imagine and hinted that the process should be kept secret. Lydia recalled her first encounter with the Astra flowers. A few months prior, a single bloom had unexpectedly appeared amongst a shipment of supplies intended for the Lily Palace. Her supplies had been mixed up with another concubine's, and the flower had fallen into her hands by chance. The unusual plant had immediately caught her attention. Lonely at the time, Lydia had found solace in caring for the flower, pouring her affections into it. She even named it the Star Flower, dedicating herself to its cultivation, ensuring it received ample sunlight, and doing her utmost to help it thrive. Lydia affectionately referred to the star flower as her pet flower, consistently praising its beauty. Despite her constant care and attention, frequently talking to it, the flower wilted after a few days. While most would discard a wilted bloom, Lydia had grown attached. Instead of throwing it away, she decided to bury it in a sunny spot. She continued to visit the spot regularly, speaking to the flower as before. To her astonishment, the dead flower not only revived but grew back larger and more beautiful than before. After the star flower's miraculous revival, Lydia repeated the process several times, eventually learning how to cultivate these flowers. She discovered the key was to recognize that even when the flowers appeared dead, they weren't truly gone. The star flowers were incredibly sensitive in their prime, yet remarkably resilient. Lydia found that if she buried the flower immediately after it wilted and spoke to it daily, it would bloom anew, a healthy and vibrant flower. Thanks to this method, she had gone from having a single star flower to possessing enough to fill a small garden. Lydia observed that there seemed to be a limit to the number of star flowers a single person could cultivate, but the presence of these beautiful blooms filled her with joy nonetheless. As she nurtured them, she began to dream of a future outside the palace walls, envisioning herself owning a flower shop. She noted the only drawback was the star flowers' faint fragrance. However, their stunning appearance convinced her that they would sell well regardless. It struck Lydia as odd that she couldn't find any information about star flowers in any botanical books, adding to their mystique. Lydia wondered if the star flowers were a recent discovery or perhaps a unique variant not yet documented by scholars. She considered whether others might be unable to cultivate them because they didn't know the specific method. Reflecting on her own situation, she realized that having ample free time had allowed her the opportunity to experiment and learn how to grow them. As she continued to ponder, it suddenly occurred to her that the flowers Uracina had worn in her hair at the ball closely resembled these star flowers. This led Lydia to suspect that the flowers might be a specialty of Fland, perhaps unique to the region. Lydia mused that Uracina, soon to be empress, likely wouldn't be interested in selling star flowers. Once Uracina and the emperor were deeply in love, no one would care if Lydia vanished from the palace. She imagined that, in such a scenario, she could leave the palace, open her own flower shop, and live a life of freedom. She dreamt of making a fortune selling star flowers. But then she quickly realized she had almost revealed the crux of her business plan and retirement scheme. She chided herself for nearly sharing such vital information. Mar told Lydia it was nothing and she needn't worry. He went on to explain that the flowers weren't truly dead and just needed to be buried. However, Lydia found herself contemplating whether she should keep the secret of the flowers from Mar, hesitant and unsure of what to do. Mar, noticed her hesitation and asked what she was doing, then offered to bury the flowers for her. He explained that since she had shared her breakfast with him, he could at least do this much in return. He urged her to sit and rest while he took care of the flowers. Lydia felt a pang of guilt about keeping the cultivation of her flowers a secret from March. She decided to tell him. He had offered to help her before, and he wasn't planning on selling them like she was, so she reasoned there was no harm in it. After all, she knew exactly how many flowers she had. If he took any, she would easily notice. Since they were going to be living together from now on, she realized she couldn't keep it from him forever. So, she explained the entire process, assuring him that she would handle the rest of the work, and thanking him for his offer of help. Mar, however, insisted on trying his hand at it. A flicker of joy sparked within Lydia. She realized how grateful she was that Mar was willing to care for her precious flowers. As she agreed to teach him, she thought to herself that, for the first time in years, she was genuinely enjoying a conversation with someone. Her life, once quiet and monotonous, now felt vibrant, filled with the possibility of connection. She recalled the 3 years she had spent in solitude, never truly conversing with anyone until now. In this moment, she wondered if this newfound connection with Mar was the reward for enduring such prolonged loneliness. Over the past 3 years, Lydia had become accustomed to limited social interaction, primarily engaging in formal exchanges with others, like the recent conversation about the defective items in the supply box. Yet, when she thought of her new roommate, Mar, a sense of delight washed over her. He was gentle, easy to get along with, and undeniably handsome, qualities she greatly appreciated. More importantly, his willingness to help made her feel valued. Lydia looked forward to asking him to help prepare dinner after they finished tending to the flowers. Though she had hoped to escape the drama of the novel's plot and live a peaceful life, she realized that despite her best efforts, she was once again entangled in its threads. Lydia found herself surprised by her current situation. As she sat there, sipping tea with Urena, she couldn't help but wonder how she had gotten here. Urena, with a warm smile, inquired if Lydia was enjoying the tea. Lydia replied that she was, complimenting its pleasant aroma and taste. Urena revealed that it was the most popular tea in Furland, and she was glad to have brought some to the Empire. She explained that she wanted to share it, which was why she had brewed some for Lydia. Still slightly taken aback by the unexpected invitation, Lydia expressed her gratitude for the tea and the beautiful garden setting, but couldn't help but wonder what had prompted this rare gesture from the princess. Urena explained that she simply wanted to enjoy tea with Lydia and requested that she now address her as Lady Urena, as she had officially become a concubine of the Heron Empire. Lydia was stunned. They had only met once at the ball, and it was unusual for Urena to be so friendly. Urena continued, explaining that since Lydia was the only other concubine she knew in the palace, she wanted to meet and chat after Lydia had settled in. Lydia thought to herself that the only other concubines present at the ball that day were herself and Lady Caroline, and Lady Caroline had been expelled from the palace that very night. Then, Lydia responded to Urena, expressing her gratitude for the tea invitation. She mentioned that she, too, was looking forward to seeing Urena again, hoping they could chat often and become good friends. Lydia found the situation odd. According to the novel's plot, the Emperor was supposed to fall in love with Urena, yet Urena remained the lowest-ranking concubine in the palace. And the Emperor didn't seem to be making any moves to change that. Lydia wondered if the novel's plot had somehow changed, but quickly dismissed the thought, believing the love story between the main characters should still hold true. She considered that she might have forgotten some details, especially since she had been preoccupied with survival for the past 3 years. At least she was relieved that she still remembered the main plot points. Lydia called out to Urena, resolve hardening in her voice. Since Urena had shown an interest in her, Lydia reasoned she should try to gain her favor. After all, in the novel, the Emperor eventually falls in love with Urena. So, Lydia knew that befriending Urena was crucial for her survival in the palace. She planned to become her ally and, when the time was right, escape the palace walls. Lydia then presented Urena with the item she had kept since their encounter on the ballroom terrace, explaining that she had been holding onto it to return. As Urena inhaled the scent, Lydia thought to herself how she'd forgotten how potent the perfume was. The moment the bottle opened, the fragrance filled the air. She believed returning the perfume would help her win Urina's favor. Urina remarked that she had been wondering where the perfume had gone. Lydia apologized for the delay, explaining that the bottle had broken and some of the perfume had spilled on her hands, but she had carefully wrapped it up. She added that the perfume smelled lovely. Such a shame about the broken bottle. Lydia, noticing Urina's reaction, wondered if something was amiss. She was puzzled by Urina's sudden shift in demeanor, unsure why she was acting this way. Urina then asked Lydia how much she knew about the perfume and who had sent her. Lydia, shocked and uncertain of the reasoning behind these questions, asked for clarification, not understanding what Urina meant. Panic began to set in. Lydia thought Urina might be angry about the broken bottle. Fearful of the consequences, she decided to confess. She apologized for the accident, quickly explaining that she knew nothing about the perfume and had likely stepped on the bottle without realizing it. She promised to take responsibility and begged for forgiveness. Lydia was now in a full-blown panic, convinced she had angered Urina, feeling as though she might be in serious trouble. She thought back to how she had avoided dangerous situations before, only to now face a potential death threat over something as trivial as a broken perfume bottle. Urina urged her to stand, her voice laced with concern as she pressed further, asking if anyone else knew about the perfume. Lydia quickly assured her that she was the only one. She had kept it with the intention of returning it to Urina and hadn't told Sol. Lydia apologized, worried she might have upset her. Urina then realized she may have misinterpreted Lydia's intentions and apologized. She thanked Lydia for her honesty and understanding. Flustered, Lydia responded that Urina needn't thank her for something like this. However, Urina insisted that the perfume was important to her, and she was grateful Lydia had found it. This surprised Lydia, as she hadn't realized the perfume held such significance. Lydia apologized again for breaking the bottle, but Urina reassured her it was not a big deal. What mattered more was that Lydia had returned it. Urina then made a more personal suggestion, inviting Lydia to address her by her first name, to call her Urina from now on, a gesture of friendship and trust. Lydia was taken aback by Urina's casual request to use her given name. It felt too informal and unexpected. Lydia reflected on the vast differences between them. She had become the emperor's concubine because her parents had used her as a pawn in a peace treaty, while Urina had been the sole heir to the Furland royalty, later taken hostage and eventually becoming a concubine. Despite their different backgrounds, Lydia realized they shared a common experience. Within the Heron Empire, neither of them truly had anyone on their side and had to rely on themselves to survive within the palace walls. Lydia then recalled how much she had enjoyed her conversation with Urina. Urina had shared valuable insights about the continent and the political landscape of the empire in a way that Lydia could easily understand, further solidifying their connection through this conversation. Lydia realized that Urina was far more complex than she had initially imagined. Not only was Urina a skilled orator, but she was also incredibly intelligent, possessing the courage and strength required to lead a nation. Lydia was astonished that someone like Urina had become the 31st concubine and was on track to become the empress. Urina's goal of reclaiming her kingdom by becoming empress seemed within reach. Lydia mused that becoming the queen of Furland would be a wonderful thing too. It was a shame that Urina's fate had led her to this position. Urina felt a secret wave of relief wash over her. She had feared that the loss of the Star Rhyme perfume would lead to her execution by the emperor, but fortunately, no one in the palace knew about it. Thanks to Lydia, Urina shuddered to think what would have happened if the emperor's men had discovered the perfume. Even more worrying was the faint scent of Star Rhyme that might linger on Lydia. The emperor was no fool. Urina worried that he might notice. If the emperor realized that the faint fragrance was from a highly concentrated poison, he might secretly execute both Urina and Lydia. Urina pondered her predicament. Using the remaining perfume to get close to the emperor, all for the sake of her kingdom, filled her with conflict. But she didn't want to put Lydia in danger. She decided she had to dispose of the perfume and devise another strategy to approach the emperor. Her thoughts turned to the spy she had planted within the palace, the one who provided her with intelligence about the emperor. Years ago, the Heron Empire and the Alkiade Empire had engaged in a brutal war. Despite the fierce fighting, the Heron Empire had ultimately emerged victorious. It was the crown prince who had led the vanguard and slain the Alkiade commander. The commander reported to the crown prince their victory in battle. Though some Alkiade rebels remained alive, they posed no significant threat. The prince inquired about the state of their commander. The commander replied that he was receiving urgent treatment for a thigh wound. The prince, his thoughts unspoken, expressed his disappointment, pointing out that the commander had pleaded to lead the troops, yet lay wounded in bed without even engaging the enemy commander. He then decided there was no need to visit the commander and announced he would return to the palace to report their victory to the emperor. He also ordered the commander not to return to the empire until all the Alkiade rebels were dealt with. The commander swiftly acknowledged the order. The prince contemplated the thoughts that suddenly flooded his mind. He recalled the Alkiade commander, his vibrant green eyes, which had turned a dull crimson as he was stabbed through the heart. It made him wonder if his own red eyes meant he was a corpse. He questioned whether his ability to kill relentlessly without remorse or emotion was because he was already dead. He pondered, like the eyes of the dead, were his red eyes also such a sign? Despite these dark thoughts, he acknowledged that the seemingly indestructible Alkiade Empire had finally been conquered and destroyed. The prince recalled how he had single-handedly slain the Alkiade commander, without any assistance from the Heron commander. He silently hoped his father would finally accept him as his son. However, the Duke responded harshly, accusing the prince of defying death, claiming he was impossible to kill. The Duke expressed his disdain, implying the prince's survival and contribution to the war changed nothing. He refused to acknowledge the prince as heir, criticizing his lack of royal blood. The Duke ordered the prince to stop sullying the royal family and to die, demonstrating his utter rejection. The prince addressed the Duke as Your Majesty, but the Duke coldly dismissed him, stating he was not his father and the prince was not his son. The Duke insulted the prince, calling him the Empress's shameful secret. He accused the Empress of being barren and greedy, claiming someone like her could never birth a proper heir. He denounced the prince as a bloodthirsty demon. He pointed to the prince's red eyes as proof of his cursed nature, warning that shame would befall anyone who gazed upon them. The narrative then shifts to the ailing empress. Prince Marquez had always believed the empress to be his birth mother, but there was a significant problem. The emperor and empress looked nothing like him. Marquez was taller and more handsome than both of them, and neither of them possessed silver hair and red eyes. This sparked doubts about his true parentage. Due to these inconsistencies, the emperor's suspicion towards his son, Marquez, began to grow. The emperor was a poor swordsman, while Marquez had shown exceptional talent with a blade since childhood. The emperor had waited 15 years for an heir, but Marquez was utterly different from him, especially in appearance. The only trait Marquez shared with his supposed mother was his silver hair. This led the emperor to suspect that the empress might have had an affair with another man. Soon, the truth came to light. The empress, fearing she would lose the emperor's favor due to her inability to conceive, had lied about her pregnancy and brought back her sister's son, Marquez, passing him off as her own. With a sneer, the Duke told the prince he didn't even want to look at him, ordering him out of his sight. After a moment of silence, the prince replied that he would set out to quell the remaining rebels in Alkiade. The Duke sarcastically agreed that it was a good idea, adding that it would be even better if the prince died alongside the rebels. As the prince departed, he couldn't help but wonder what he had done wrong this time. Had he not killed the enemy commander quickly enough? Or was it his red eyes? The prince pondered the eyes that made him look like a bloodthirsty monster, the eyes that had always unsettled him. Every time he saw them in the mirror, he wanted to gouge them out. They made his skin crawl, reminding him of death.